How to take pictures at night games, football, soccer, and lacrosse. What we will cover: what is a night game, issues when shooting a night game, gear and exposure, away games, lights, exposure, shooting on the field or from the bleachers, managing expectations, other items, and tips. Night games, what is it? When the sun goes down and the field is illuminated by artificial lighting. Night depends on your latitude and time of the year. The further north you go, the earlier it starts in the winter and the later it starts in the summer. For example, for me, in the winter, half of the afternoon game is a night game. In the spring, half of the night game is a day game. Shooting a night game. Difference from a day game. The primary item, light level, is much lower. High school stadiums usually do not have the light levels of a pro or college stadium, which are set up for TV cameras. The lighting may be adequate for your eyes, but difficult to take pictures with. And you have to deal with shadows from the lights. And the ambient temperature can be low, sometimes quite low. Gear. Camera. Shoot with the camera with the best low light performance, a high ISO of 25,600 or more. Lens. Shoot with the fastest lens you can, ideally f2.8. The 70 to 200 2.8. Now the 70 to 200 2.8 is a heavy lens and may need a monopod for sport. If you have enough light, the lighter 70 to 200 f4 lens may work, but it is a compromise. Exposure, meter mode, center weight. Exposure mode, shutter priority, shutter speed 1/1000th of a second, or if you have to go down, no lower than 1/500th of a second. ISO set to auto. Second option, manual mode, aperture wide open, f2.8. Shutter speed 1/1000th of a second, and again, no lower than 1/500. ISO auto, or you could go fixed. Always test your exposure. For auto ISO, adjust the exposure compensation as needed. For manual ISO, adjust the ISO level. What about the common or older kits, such as where your camera may have a lower max ISO of 6400? Or lenses, slower lenses, 18 to 55 or 18 to 140, with the aperture of f3.5 to 5.6, maybe a 50 to 200, 4.5 to 5.6, or a 75 to 300, 4.5 to 6.3. Set exposure, mode, shutter priority, shutter speed 1/500th of a second, ISO auto. Always test your exposure, especially with this combination. Adjust the exposure compensation if you're running shutter priority. Adjust the exposure shutter speed if you hit the ceiling. You're setting with that particular gear, you may end up underexposing. So you may have to drop your shutter speed down, maybe from 500 to 250 to 125. There may be a point where you cannot take good pictures with the older, slower gear. Note about shutter speed. I recommend 1/1000th of a second. If you are in a dim stadium or the max ISO of your camera is less than 25,600, you will have to use a slower shutter speed. Note, the slower your shutter speed, the more likely you are to have a blurred subject, either from the subject and or you moving. Cameras and lenses may have image stabilization, but they only compensate for your motion, not the subject moving. Subject moving on the field is still going to be blurry. For reference, my exposure at my school stadium. Location, center of the field, exposure mode M, manual, ISO 10,000. The ISO level has been increasing over the years. Several years ago, I shot at ISO 6400. I suspect the lights are dimming with age. And in another couple of years, I may be up at ISO 16,000. Shutter speed, 1/800 of a second. Aperture, f4. Away games. The light level at other schools can differ significantly. It may be brighter, or it may be darker than at your home field. Make and keep a record of the required exposure at other schools. This is for when you or someone else has to shoot an away game at that school. If that school is dimmer than at your school, you may have to use specific gear. For example, faster lens, 70-200 2.8, and or a camera with a high max ISO of 25,600 or more. Or you may have to make a decision to not shoot at that school stadium. There is one school in my district that I have basically written off. I will no longer shoot a night game at that stadium. The light level is too low for the gear that I have. Lights. Where are the lights? In this picture, there are 2 light stands on each side of the field. Look at the red lines headed to the field. On the left side of the field, the light is approximately at the 10-yard line. On the right side of the field, the light is approximately at the 15-yard line. That has an effect on lighting distribution and shadows. Some schools may have more lights for more even lighting. Look at this picture. They have 4 light stands on each side of the field. So where we have a dark goal line, they have more light on that side, so they don't have it as dark on the goal line. Like this. This is soccer. They are inside the 5-yard line. Look at the deep shadows on their faces and the front of their body. Shooting from this side of the field, you're going to get deep shadows on the players. Basically, when the players come inside the 10-yard line, or 15-yard line in this case, I stop shooting because they're going to have deep shadows on their faces. If you have more even lighting on the field, you won't have such deep shadows. Exposure. Shooting on the field or from the bleachers. Shooting on the field. Here you are shooting across the field. The issue here is when you are shooting across the field, and in my case, when you're shooting either north or south, there are no bleachers in the background. Your background is dark, and you are shooting and metering a dark background. That dark background will cause the meter to overexpose the players as shown in this picture. On the field methods, metering modes, PS or A. Set the metering to center weight metering. Set the autofocus point to 1 or 2 positions high. This forces the meter to be below the autofocus point. And this is what we mean. Look at the screen. The blue square is the autofocus point. We've raised it up. The metering is in that red circle. By doing this, Now we can put the autofocus point on the players in the blue square, but the meter is reading the field below the blue square. So it's not metering the dark trees in the background. Manual. Be aware of the direction of light. The ends of the field are sometimes dimmer than the center. Use your lighting plot. This is the light dimness plot that we determined in part 2 of the night games video. Here we can see a reference of how dim the different parts of the field are. For example, bottom right-hand corner. If you're going to be shooting at that from the visitors' bleachers, you know you need to open up 2 stops. If you're going to be shooting in the end zone and the players are inside of the 10-yard line, you know you've got a 5-stop difference that you have to deal with. Shooting from the bleachers, you're shooting down onto the field, so your metering is off the field around the subject, not the dark background. Metering will be okay. During the day, the recommended lens from the top of the bleacher is a 100-400 or 150-600. So the question is, at night, can you use the much shorter 70-200 2.8? As shown in this picture, you can, but the issue is distance. In this picture, we're going to be shooting from the red diamond on the right of the bleachers at the bottom of the screen. Here's the issue. My normal limit for the 70-200 on an APS-C camera is 50 yards. That is the green arc. As you can see, most of the football field is beyond 50 yards. So we're going to be looking at 2 shots. Shot on the right, 75 yards to the 15-yard line on the opposite side of the field. Shot on the left, 105 yards to the goal line on the opposite side of the field. These are the 2 pictures. The field of view of a 70-200 on an APS-C camera set at 200 millimeters at 105 yards on the left and 75 yards on the right. These are the full frame images. Is it big enough for you, or is it too small? You will have to crop into these pictures to get a usable shot. And therein lies the problem. Will you be able to crop in deep enough, and will it retain enough image quality to use? At night, that corner of my stadium at that angle is approximately 2 stops dimmer than the central part of the field. The exposure ISO for the center of the field is 6,400. The exposure ISO for that corner will be 25,600. At ISO 25,600, the image quality of the image to do a deep crop will be poor. And by the way, when I said you need cameras that can go up to 25,600, this is why. So, can you use a 70-200 2.8 from the top of the bleacher at night? Unfortunately, the answer is it depends. For a shallow crop of multiple players, it is probably okay. For a deep crop of an individual, it depends. It depends on the optical quality of the lens. If you have to do a deep crop into the image, is the optical quality there? Next, the light level at that spot on your field matters. Low light will drive the ISO level up. That increases the high ISO noise and reduces how deep into the image you can crop before the image starts degrading. Picture size matters. The larger the picture, the more visible the high ISO noise. Make the picture small and it may work. Recommendation: test your camera and lens in the same lighting condition and subject position. Then you can make your own decision. Expectations, or setting your expectations to reality. For example, you can't get this shot at night. This is what you get. When the sky turns black, that dark brown ball disappears in the sky. Other. Weather. When the sun goes down, the ambient temperature drops. At my school, the temperature can drop 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. You can start off in the afternoon in shorts and t-shirt and be sweating in the sun. And at 8 o'clock at night, you could be freezing. Jeans, ski jacket, and a wool hat. Dress for the weather. Cold gear if necessary. And you may have to do a clothing change in the middle. Plan where you can do that, where you can put on your long pants and your heavy jacket. Also, rain gear and plastic bag for the camera. Do not get your camera wet. Cameras don't like getting wet. A wet camera will probably need an expensive repair if it can even be repaired. Logistics. If you're staying from school, it will be a long day. Food and water. Bring non-perishable food. Bring water. You may not be close to a fountain. Clothing. As I said before, bring clothing appropriate for the weather. The afternoon could be hot, but the night could be cold. Tip number 1, words of wisdom. If there is a sport that normally plays at night, and if there is a day game, shoot it. If you have to go to an away game to shoot a day game, do it. There is so much more light during the day. You do not have to make the exposure compromises that you have to for night games. And day games are warmer. The end. Please like and subscribe.